There comes a point in every empath's life when silence turns into a roar. For years, they may have endured the chaos of narcissists, manipulators, and those who saw their kindness as weakness. They gave without asking for return, they forgave when others would have walked away, and they carried burdens that were never theirs to carry. But when an empath finally reaches the edge, when they are fed up, something extraordinary happens. They stop playing the role that was written for them by others, and they begin to write their own story. Carl Jung once said that every light casts a shadow. The empath is the purest example of this truth. Their light is compassion, intuition, and selfless love. But the shadow of that light is a power that even the narcissist cannot imagine. A fed-up empath is no longer just a healer. They become a mirror. And mirrors have the power to reveal the truth that others cannot escape. For so long, empaths often confuse tolerance with strength. They believe that enduring mistreatment proves their capacity for love. Yet Jung's psychology reminds us that what we repress eventually returns with greater force. The empath represses anger, represses disappointment, represses the quiet voice that says enough is enough. But repression is not disappearance. It is only postponement. And when the day arrives that the empath can no longer repress, the release is unstoppable. Think of the empath as a river. In its natural flow, the river nourishes, provides, and sustains life. But if you dam the river, blocking it again and again, the water builds in pressure. The longer it is held back, the more forceful its breaking will be. When the empath's patience finally breaks, it does not come out as a quiet whisper, it comes out as a flood. A flood that washes away lies, illusions, and the carefully constructed masks that narcissists wear. What makes this moment so dangerous for the narcissist is not anger alone. It is clarity. A fed-up empath sees through the manipulation without effort. The charm no longer works, the guilt no longer bites, the threats no longer sting. What was once confusion now becomes sharp vision. Jung often described individuation as the process of becoming whole, where the unconscious rises into awareness and reveals its strength. In the same way, when the empath has had enough, their unconscious power rises, and they realize they were never weak at all. They were reservoirs of strength waiting to be discovered. The narcissist thrives on control. They rely on the empath's willingness to explain, to justify, to give one more chance. But when the empath is fed up, they no longer explain. They simply see. And when someone who sees with such depth looks directly at the narcissist, the illusion begins to crumble. Because the empath does not attack with cruelty. They attack with truth. And truth, once spoken clearly, cannot be forgotten. There is a quiet authority in the voice of a fed-up empath. It does not shout, it does not need to. It speaks from a place deeper than anger. It speaks from survival. It speaks from the recognition that the soul has been wounded, but not destroyed, bent, but not broken. And in that recognition lies an energy that is both liberating and frightening. For the empath, it is liberation. For the narcissist, it is the end of control. Carl Jung warned that those who do not make the unconscious conscious will be ruled by it. The narcissist lives in denial of their own shadow, projecting it onto others, feeding on their pain. But the empath, once awakened, refuses to carry that shadow any longer. They return it to its source. And this return is devastating, because the narcissist is forced to face themselves, often for the first time. What follows is a transformation in the empath. No longer desperate for validation, no longer enslaved by guilt, they step into a new chapter. A chapter defined not by how much they can endure, but by how clearly they can see. The empath begins to recognize their sensitivity as a form of wisdom, not a curse. Their emotions become instruments of truth rather than weapons turned against themselves. And slowly, they realize that the very qualities they once felt ashamed of are the same qualities that make them unstoppable once they awaken. It is here, in this quiet revolution, that the empath becomes dangerous. Not because they harm others, but because they no longer allow others to harm them. They understand their worth, and they understand their boundaries. They discover that saying no is not cruelty, but self-respect. They discover that walking away is not weakness, but strength. And they discover that choosing themselves is the greatest act of love they could ever perform. This is the moment the narcissist never imagined, when the source of their power suddenly cuts the cord. When the one who always stayed, finally leaves. When the one who always forgave, finally refuses. When the one who always believed in their potential, finally sees the truth. And the truth is this: the empath was never powerless. They were simply patient. And when patience runs out, the world shifts. When the empath awakens from years of silence, something within them changes forever. They begin to realize that their role was never meant to be a vessel for other people's shadows. For so long, they absorbed the pain, the projection, the criticism, believing that if they carried it quietly enough, love would finally blossom. But when the silence cracks, they see it for what it truly was: a prison built from misplaced hope. Carl Jung taught that the soul longs for wholeness, not perfection. And in this longing, the empath discovers that their endless giving was not a sign of holiness, but a symptom of forgetting themselves. Wholeness requires balance. Compassion must flow outward, but it must also flow inward. To deny oneself in the name of serving others is to cut the soul in half. And no soul can remain split without pain. This recognition is not sudden, though. It unfolds like dawn after a long night. At first, the empath feels confusion, even guilt. To say no feels unnatural, to protect their heart feels selfish. They fear that by drawing a line, they are betraying their own nature. But as Jung would say, true self-discovery often begins in discomfort. The discomfort is not punishment, it is growth. And through this, the empath begins to understand that self-respect is not the opposite of love, it is the foundation of it. The narcissist does not know what to do with this shift. They are used to an empath who bends, who softens, who always extends the hand one more time. When that hand is finally pulled back, the narcissist is left with nothing but their own reflection. And that reflection is unbearable. Without the empath absorbing the blame, the narcissist is confronted with their emptiness. This confrontation is the one thing they fear most, because it reveals a truth they cannot manipulate away. For the empath, the moment of stepping back is like breathing for the first time. It feels raw, it feels uncertain, but it also feels alive. They begin to reclaim their energy that for years was drained in the service of keeping others comfortable. They notice small changes. Their body feels lighter. Their thoughts clearer. The constant storm of anxiety, wondering if they've done enough for everyone else, begins to calm. In its place, a quiet peace emerges, fragile at first, but real. This is when the empath learns the deepest lesson of all: that their sensitivity, once used against them, is actually their greatest strength. Sensitivity allows them to see beyond words, beyond masks, into the essence of people. And when this gift is no longer entangled in toxic patterns, it becomes a source of guidance. They can now sense who deserves their energy, and who only seeks to drain it. They can discern which relationships nourish them and which ones suffocate them. This clarity transforms their life in ways that once seemed impossible. But there is more. Jung often emphasized the union of opposites, the light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious. The empath begins to embrace their shadow too. For years, they denied their anger, believing it made them unloving. They hid their boundaries, believing it made them cold. Yet the shadow is not an enemy. It is a teacher. And when the empath integrates their shadow, they no longer fear their own strength. They allow themselves to be whole, compassionate, yes, but also firm, gentle, yes, but also unshakable. This integration is what makes a fed-up empath so powerful. They no longer fight against themselves. The inner war between wanting to give and needing to protect finally finds peace. And from this peace arises a strength that is silent yet immovable. It is the strength of someone who knows who they are and what they deserve. The narcissist, used to exploiting division within the empath, suddenly finds no entry point. The old tactics fail. The guilt trips fall flat. The manipulation loses its sting. The empath does not hate them, does not seek revenge, they simply detach. And this detachment is the final blow, because it denies the narcissist the one thing they crave above all: control. For the empath, detachment is not coldness. It is freedom. It is the discovery that love does not mean sacrifice without end. That compassion does not mean carrying what was never theirs. That forgiveness does not mean returning to the same cycle. It is a love that begins within, radiating outward in balance. It is the realization that their soul was never meant to be a battlefield, but a sanctuary. And when the empath finally stands in the sanctuary, they are no longer the same person. They have crossed a threshold that cannot be reversed. They see life differently, they see themselves differently. And most of all, they see the truth of those who once deceived them. The truth that behind the narcissist's charm lies emptiness. Behind their arrogance lies fear. Behind their cruelty lies fragility. The empath, once bound by illusion, now sees reality with clarity sharper than steel. And in that clarity, they find their true power. Once the empath has stepped into this clarity, something profound begins to unfold. They notice that life itself starts to shift around them. Where once they attracted those who fed on their compassion, now they draw toward themselves people who value it. Where once they lived in constant exhaustion, now they discover an energy that feels almost new. This is not magic, nor is it coincidence. It is the natural effect of reclaiming what was always theirs, their own soul. Carl Jung described individuation as the journey of becoming whole, of aligning the conscious self with the deeper reality of the unconscious. For the empath, this journey often begins with pain, because their nature has been entangled in relationships that exploit rather than honor them. But the pain, once faced, becomes a doorway. On the other side of that doorway lies a version of themselves they never thought possible, a self that is not only sensitive, but strong, not only compassionate, but wise. This new self is no longer driven by fear of abandonment. For years, the empath tolerated cruelty because they feared being alone. They mistook the presence of another person for connection, even when that presence came wrapped in manipulation. But when they finally embrace solitude, they realize it is not loneliness at all, it is spaciousness. It is breathing room for the soul. It is the space in which they can listen to their own heart without interference. And in that silence, they realize they are not empty, they are full. The narcissist cannot understand this transformation. To them, love is control, and power is dominance. They cannot comprehend how an empath could walk away and still remain whole. They expect collapse. They expect regret. But what they see instead is a person who grows stronger the further they step away. This is the danger they never imagined, that the empath would not only survive without them, but would thrive in ways they never thought possible. The empath begins to build new patterns. They start trusting their intuition again, not dismissing it as oversensitivity. They listen when their body tightens in warning, when their spirit whispers that something is wrong. They no longer override their instincts to keep the peace. And by trusting themselves, they discover peace is not something to be negotiated with others, it is something they can create within. Jung often spoke about the shadow not as an enemy but as a part of the self that must be acknowledged. The empath who once denied their anger now allows it to guide them. Not as rage, not as destruction, but as a signal of injustice. Their anger tells them when a boundary has been crossed, when respect has been violated, when love has turned into exploitation. And by listening to this anger, they protect their heart without losing their compassion. It is not bitterness, it is balance. Slowly, the empath realizes that their greatest gift was never just sensitivity. Their gift is awareness. They feel deeply, yes, but more importantly, they see deeply. They see patterns, they see motives, they see truths hidden behind masks. And once this awareness is paired with boundaries, it becomes unshakable. They are no longer easy prey. They are no longer silent carriers of other people's shadows. They are awake. For the narcissist, this awakening is terrifying. Because the empath does not seek revenge, they do not fight on the narcissist's terms. They simply step out of the game altogether. And when someone steps out of the game, the entire game collapses. The narcissist is left exposed, with no one to blame, no one to control, no one to feed their fragile ego. But for the empath, this is not about the narcissist anymore. It is about reclaiming life. They begin to rediscover passions they had buried, dreams they had delayed, joy they had forgotten. They realize that sensitivity is not only about relationships, it is about art, about creativity, about connection to nature, about the quiet beauty of existence itself. In this rediscovery, they touch the soul of life with fresh eyes, as if the world itself has been waiting for them to return. This is why a fed-up empath is so dangerous. Not because they destroy others, but because they rebuild themselves. They rise from years of silence not with bitterness, but with clarity. And clarity is more powerful than anger ever could be. It cannot be argued with, it cannot be deceived, it cannot be undone. The empath who was once broken becomes a force of presence. They walk into a room differently. They speak with a steadiness that others feel in their bones. They no longer try to be understood by everyone, because they finally understand themselves. And in this quiet self-possession, they carry a strength that is undeniable. And once this strength has been found, there is no going back. When the empath reaches this point of awakening, the changes within them begin to ripple outward. It is no longer only about breaking free from one toxic bond, it becomes about how they walk through life itself. Their perception sharpens, their choices deepen, and their presence begins to carry an energy that others cannot ignore. People sense it, even if they cannot name it. Carl Jung believed that when a person integrates both light and shadow, they embody what he called the self, the full, authentic center of being. For the empath, this integration means they are no longer trapped in extremes. They are not endlessly giving without limit, nor are they hardened into walls of bitterness. Instead, they live in balance. They can care deeply without drowning. They can listen without losing themselves. They can give without being emptied. This balance makes their compassion sustainable, and it makes their power enduring. Those around them begin to notice something different. Friends, colleagues, even strangers sense a quiet steadiness. The empath does not rush to fix everyone anymore. They do not fall into every plea for attention. Yet when they choose to engage, their words and actions carry weight. It is as if they have become a still lake, calm on the surface, but holding unimaginable depth beneath. The narcissist, however, is bewildered by this new energy. They once thrived on the empath's willingness to explain, to argue, to bend. Now, when they attempt to provoke, the empath simply does not engage. They are met with silence, or with calm clarity that leaves no cracks for manipulation. This silence is unbearable to the narcissist because it exposes them. They no longer have the power to pull the empath into chaos, and without that chaos, their control dissolves. For the empath, this silence is not emptiness, it is strength. It is the pause that comes from knowing one does not need to justify, prove, or convince. Jung often emphasized that individuation requires letting go of the masks we wear to please others. The empath's silence is the refusal to wear those masks any longer. It is a declaration of authenticity, spoken without words. As they walk deeper into this authenticity, the empath begins to attract new kinds of connections. They find people who meet them with respect rather than demand. They find relationships built not on taking, but on mutual giving. They find conversations that nurture the soul rather than drain it. It is as though the universe itself responds to their clarity by opening doors that once remained closed. This is the profound irony. The empath once believed that by sacrificing themselves, they would be loved. Yet true love only appeared once they stopped sacrificing. By valuing their own heart, they created the conditions for others to value it too. Jung said that what we most need to find is often hidden in the places we least want to look. For the empath, that place was within themselves. The love they sought outwardly was waiting inside all along. The danger for the narcissist becomes greater here, not because the empath seeks vengeance, but because they embody what the narcissist can never achieve: wholeness. The narcissist remains fractured, hiding from their own shadow, desperate for validation. The empath, once fed up, becomes whole by embracing their own shadow, finding peace with it, and allowing it to guide them. This contrast is devastating to the narcissist, because it reveals their emptiness in the face of the empath's fullness. And yet, the empath does not linger in comparison. They do not live to prove the narcissist wrong. They move forward, carrying their lessons with them, creating a life that feels aligned with their soul. They pour their sensitivity into creation, into beauty, into connections that are honest. Their tears, once seen as weakness, become rivers of wisdom. Their scars, once hidden, become maps of survival. This is the rebirth that comes when an empath is finally fed up. It is not the end of compassion, it is the beginning of true compassion, grounded in strength. It is not the end of love, it is the beginning of love that flows in both directions. It is not the end of empathy, it is empathy transformed into wisdom. And this wisdom, once awakened, is unshakable. It cannot be manipulated away, it cannot be guilt away, it cannot be taken away. It belongs to the empath fully, finally, completely. And with it, they begin to live not as someone who merely survives, but as someone who creates. When the empath finally rises from the weight of years spent giving too much, their life begins to look entirely different. At first, the change is subtle, like the faint stirring of a breeze after a long stillness. But over time, the transformation becomes undeniable. They no longer define themselves by what was taken from them, or by the wounds that once felt too heavy to bear. They begin to define themselves by what they chose instead, by the moment they said enough, by the moment they reclaimed their voice, and by the moment they chose to see clearly rather than remain in the fog. Carl Jung often wrote that what we resist persists, and what we embrace transforms. For the empath, the years of resisting their own anger, their own truth, their own boundaries only kept them trapped in cycles of pain. But the moment they embraced these parts of themselves, everything shifted. They realized that boundaries are not walls, but doors. And through those doors, they began to walk into a life that feels real, balanced, and whole. The empath who was once exhausted, carrying burdens that never belonged to them, begins to feel lighter. They no longer absorb the shadows of others without question. They no longer mistake manipulation for love, or control for care. They begin to see with eyes that are sharp, steady, and kind all at once. And with this new vision, they can no longer be deceived. The narcissist never prepared for this. They imagined the empath would always stay, always bend, always be available to feed their endless hunger for attention. They relied on the empath's silence, on their guilt, on their hope. But when the empath is fed up, when they finally awaken, the narcissist loses their most powerful weapon. The cycle breaks. The control dissolves. And the narcissist is left staring at the ruins of the game they thought they would always win. But the story is no longer about the narcissist. That chapter is closed. The empath does not linger in bitterness, because bitterness is another form of bondage. Instead, they step forward. They look at the scars on their heart, and instead of hiding them, they begin to honor them. Each scar tells a story of survival. Each wound speaks of lessons learned. Each tear that once fell quietly in the dark now shines as proof that they endured, that they rose, that they transformed. This transformation reshapes the empath's entire existence. They begin to choose differently. They no longer say yes when their soul screams no. They no longer ignore the warning signals of their own intuition. They no longer believe that love must always be sacrifice. Instead, they understand that real love flows both ways, that respect is not optional, that compassion without balance is not love but self-erasure. And this understanding makes them powerful in ways they never imagined. Their presence changes. When they walk into a room, there is a quiet strength about them. Not loud, not arrogant, not demanding, but undeniable. People sense that they are not easily swayed, not easily manipulated, not easily broken anymore. This energy draws healthy souls closer and keeps toxic ones at a distance. It is as though life itself recognizes their transformation and begins to reflect it back to them. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the privilege of becoming who you truly are. For the empath, this privilege was not given freely, it was carved out of hardship, out of betrayal, out of silence. But because of this, their individuation carries a rare kind of depth. They know what it is to be broken. They know what it is to doubt themselves. They know what it is to lose everything inside and still keep giving. And because they know all this, their wholeness now shines brighter, steadier, truer. The narcissist fades into the background of their story, no longer the center, no longer the scriptwriter, no longer the one holding the strings. They become only a shadow in memory, a lesson that taught the empath what they would never accept again. The empath does not seek revenge, because revenge is still a chain. They seek freedom. And freedom is what they find. Freedom to live without apology. Freedom to love without fear. Freedom to walk away when something feels wrong. Freedom to say no and mean it. Freedom to say yes and feel it fully. This is what makes a fed-up empath so dangerous, not the destruction of others, but the construction of themselves. They build a life that cannot be shaken by the same old games. They build a self that no longer bends to the weight of manipulation. They build a soul that is whole, radiant, and deeply alive. And as they build, something else happens. Their sensitivity, once used against them, now becomes their compass. They feel the truth in people's words, they sense the energy of situations, they recognize authenticity from pretense. What was once a vulnerability is now an extraordinary gift. And when guided by wisdom and self-respect, this gift becomes unstoppable. There is a beauty in this stage of their journey that cannot be put into simple words. They begin to see the world differently. A sunrise is not just light, but a reminder of renewal. A conversation is not just words, but a meeting of souls. Solitude is not loneliness, but an embrace of the self. Everything that once felt heavy begins to feel meaningful. Everything that once felt like loss begins to feel like transformation. So if you are listening to this as an empath, let these words rest in your heart. Your journey has not been in vain. Your pain was real, but it was not the end. Your silence was long, but it was not forever. You were not born to be used. You were not born to be broken. You were born to see, to feel, to heal, to love. And once you love yourself fully, once you choose yourself completely, nothing and no one can take that away. The world may not have always been kind to you, but you can be kind to yourself. And in that kindness, in that wholeness, you will find a strength that no narcissist could ever imagine, and no shadow could ever steal. This is the gift of being a fed-up empath. You are not broken. You are awakening. You are not defeated. You are rising. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. And in that truth, you become something unshakable, something radiant, something beautiful beyond words. And that is the power the narcissist never saw coming.